Hello, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's so great to see you. I love your
Doing
I
great
love
to
your
see you.
beard, which is a
Oh,
sign,
thank
it's
you.
got a sign of being wise, a sign of insight. So I'm delighted to have this discussion today.
That's why it's there. I don't know if I could read the New Testament without it. So, we're actually spending quite a amount of time on the centurion servant, right? Story. This is probably our third or fourth session,
Mhm.
so our third one. Yeah. So it's great. I'm happy we're able to see this a little bit more in depth. And we had a great conversation about faith last time. I don't know if you thought more about it, but it's really a great point. We didn't even go through the biblical examples of faith for the most part. And I feel like we could probably spend an academic semester talking about faith and what it means in different time periods. And I'm
Yeah.
sure we didn't do it justice. But my final conclusion was that it's used differently in different places in Matthew, but it probably means to believe in Jesus, which
That
is
is true.
again like a really unique way. If anything, it didn't mean that before Jesus was born. So no
And
matter
I,
what, it's a new usage of the word faith.
yeah, and I think that fits with fits with the gospel narrative where Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, the life. It's all through me. Either you're with me or against me. There's no other way around." And so, in that sense, this faith makes sense. What I'm still so surprised is like, what was the centurion doing in a favorite city of Capernaum? What was he doing there? And this is a time when
Not
anti
only doing there, living there, and
living
according
there.
to Luke, building synagogues.
Yeah, and at a time when anti-Semitism would have been horrible, would have been at its height, that the author of Matthew placed a centurion on a high pedestal. So even now I can't just emotionally wrap a head around it. Wow, is it a reflection
So,
of
I guess, one of the ways to look at it is that maybe some of the negativity that is being thrown out from Matthew is towards the Jewish people. And anyone who's not the Jewish people is kind of fine. It really, it's so funny. A lot of these questions depend on exactly when Matthew is written and exactly who it's written for. And as we mentioned, you can't really know this with definiteness, because there's just endless opinions. Like, this is for partial Christians, halfway to Christians, total Christians. Jews are still doing this. Jews are only getting circumcised. It's so unclear. And if anything, I would say the patchwork that we get from the book of Matthew doesn't give a clear answer. I don't think if you got the top scholars in one room, they'd come to an answer, because it really depends on what texts you give priority to, but not only that, it also depends on how you view Markian and Q inclusions into Matthew. Because if something is not indigenous to Matthew, I guess like the right way to know the answer is to figure out what was specifically Matthean and what was added but to the Matthew community. And that this is something that people do in biblical with biblical studies, when they'll do like JEPD and show where different parts of the Bible come from their perspective. But here, I feel like it's definitely they would need to have some work around that. Okay, let us get started with, we're doing only verse 11.
the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 8, verse 11. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, Isaac, I think he's talking to us. You came from the east.
That's
I,
right.
I came from the west, and we came and we're trying to eat at the table. So maybe it should say Isaac and Russ in there, and that
Yeah,
would
Isaac. That's right. So this is again back in the day. I would imagine this would have been so subversive, right? To say that um, that no, again, that many from the east and west, which is to say people who are non-Jewish, will be at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the kingdom of heaven. So do you just see this him expounding on the centurion, or do you see this in a different light, as in
well, this
this?
definitely follows the last verse where Jesus says that truly I tell you, no one in Israel have such faith. And he says lots of people will come, and this is definitely part of that conversation. Verses 10, 11, 12 should be probably viewed as one general concept, but let's break the concept into its pieces. So the first thing is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are dead in the first century. Can we agree to that, Isaac?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Dead people. So by Jesus citing them and saying people are going to eat with them, he doesn't probably, maybe he means a physical table, but he probably more likely means a metaphysical table, or a table at some future time. Because last I checked, you could also correct me, Christians don't believe that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were resurrected at the time of Jesus in the first century. So that's correct, right? So
I
therefore,
think so. I think that's fair enough, right? So I don't think so. I think again, I cannot. So my understanding is the full resurrection hasn't taken place yet.
yeah, last I checked.
It will take place at some point in the future. The full
Right. So
resurrection.
you view this as quasi literal and quasi metaphorical, right?
Mhm.
Because literal in that you believe there will be a resurrection where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be resurrected, I guess, to be judged with the rest of humanity, as most Christians, standard Christians, I'll call you standard Christian Isaac this time, as I don't want to break down into Lutheran, Anglican, and all the different conversations that you have with the Methodist community. So, putting you as our standard Christian, you believe, you can correct me about that there'll be a time of resurrection. Everyone, the good, the bad, they're going to see something in Revelations. They're going to rise. They're going to be judged. Some will go this way. Some will go that way. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, them being historical people, will be risen and I guess judged.
Right.
And they'll be on team good, the good team. And
Now, wouldn't you say that as a Pharisee that you also have a similar belief? I know that
oh, I like how you bring up my Pharisaic beliefs. Yes, us Pharisees do believe um, in a resurrection. The
yeah.
resurrection is a little bit more murky about what kind of judgment will take place. Some say everyone will be judged, some say not. It's hard to know what a resurrection means when some people are burnt to death and some people are decomposed. And so these things are complicated matters. And as a Pharisee, I try not to overly focus on what it means to resurrect as much as that we know God can resurrect. But let's just imagine that these folk, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, my favorite forefathers,
Mhm.
will be risen. But what are they going to do when they rise? You would have thought there'd be something when everyone's judged. I tell you, many will come east and west, and they'll be judged with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom and join the kingdom of heaven. But that is not what this says, Isaac. The focus is on eating. And if you look in the Greek is a little more unclear. It could mean reclining, but reclining in Greek culture would have been like the Passover Seder. We say we recline. That's when you have a fancier meal. So reclining, eating, festivities, lots of fun. So Isaac, I would love to hear about from you where eating falls into your messianic belief system.
Yeah, Rabbi. So again, thank you for highlighting eating. I had not thought about that, but reclining eating. So
That's what they're all going to do together.
yeah,
That's the party.
so this fits with the Christian narrative on the Eucharist. Every service ends with the Eucharist, the heavenly feast. I don't have an exact terminology, but it's that feast where you eat the heavenly bread, the heavenly man, the wine, the bread, and that was the context of Jesus's final supper. And so, when you said recline and eating, my mind my mind went to the Last Supper, and because that was the context where Jesus had his final supper with the disciples. He washed their legs, they had a fancy meal, and they had a good meal. And
So that meal portended the future. You're saying in a way that this verse portends fortuitously the future, that there'll be a time period when the goodies, the good people, as epitomized by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, will be in the kingdom of heaven eating. And again, I think a lot of times when I see cartoonish drawings of Seventh Day Adventists, what they're going to be doing, a lot of times it has to do with fruit and
mhm,
vegetables and fancy tables out in the public, not needing air conditioning, but looking sunny with no
mhm,
flies around. And so we see that there's this idea of a meal. So what I want to do today is talk to you about that meal. So I
okay,
want to give you some background. So first, in Jewish literature, throughout, I could give you probably 30 sources if I had to look at it. There's the idea that at the advent of the Messianic era, there'll be a banquet, but that banquet will be a special banquet. If I asked you, Isaac, what is the best food for this banquet? You have to imagine you are the biblical writer or the rabbinic writer, and you have to talk about the food. What is the one food that is ubiquitously noted will be served at this meal? You want to take a guess? I'll tell you, it's not pig. You can throw pig right out there. Okay, but putting aside pig, what do you think
So
it is?
grape, wine, I mean,
The answer is the Leviathan.
what's Leviathan?
What's the Leviathan? That's great. Leviathan is the mythical slash maybe historical snake-like, dragon-like being that's mentioned in Genesis as being
Oh,
as being the size of the ocean, mentioned in Revelations, mentioned in Christian uh, thought throughout. And what I want to do is talk about that meal, talk about the Leviathan, and try to note Judaism's and Christianity's different attitudes. So first of all, if you look into Tehillim, Psalm 74:14, the psalmist says that God will act as one who crushed the head of the Leviathan and
mhm.
gave him, the Leviathan, as food to creatures of the wilderness. So we already see in the biblical text of Psalms that God is feeding the Leviathan to people, to creatures. What we see in the Babylonian Talmud in Baba Batra 74b, it says, Rabbi Huda says that Rav says, everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in this world, He created male and female. So everything that, just like male and female went onto the ark, so too God created a male and female lion, tiger, whatever. Even Leviathan, the slant serpent, and Leviathan, the torturous serpent, He created male and female. So these things are supposed to be unimaginably large. And if they would have coupled, if they would have produced offspring and had babies, they were so big that their babies, it would just take over the world. Like if they had two
Mhm.
babies, the whole world would be overcome. So what did the Holy One, blessed be, do? He castrated the male and killed the female and salted the female to preserve it for the banquet for the righteous in the future. As the verse from Isaiah says, he will slay the serpent that is in the sea. So just soak this up. I've heard this story 1,000 times, but if you hear it the first time, it's probably a little bit disconcerting. He castrated the male, so the male lives on in this world, in the Mediterranean Sea and Atlantic Ocean somewhere, but he kills the female. God then takes the female, salts her, slices her up, and then that is the food that will be given in the Messianic age at this banquet. So when we
Seems so
look at this
grotesque.
story, even
Seems so grotesque, right? I mean,
uh, well, listen, they have to take the biblical text of Genesis take it seriously when it says he created them. So I guess you either say they're super small, but what we see is that this meal that is alluded to already in Matthew 8:11 is already talked about in rabbinic literature. So when you say it's grotesque, what you hear is grotesque, I hear what does it mean? So sometimes Leviathan is a metaphor for enlightenment, that it still exists in this world. It exists in the next world. Some of it, the male, you can access somehow. So you have to say somehow it's a biblical concept becomes a metaphor for something. So I want to go and talk a little bit more about this a little bit. I want to say, but for Christians, if you look up Leviathan, this is the worst thing in the world. Leviathan is often like the embodiment of chaos, and it's threatening to eat the damned and in the afterlife. In the end, according to most, again, some Christian theologians, Leviathan is identified as the demon of the deadly sin, envy. It's also a concept, but it's only evil. What we see in like Judaism, you see, it's kind of like it's not bad, it's not good. It just happens to be too big, so God has to use it. But then it becomes this metaphor. We even seen that Jerome, the church father, when he comments on Psalm 140, 104:26, he talks about this and he says, this is the dragon that was cast out of paradise, that beguiled Eve, and is permitted in this world to make sport of us. How monks and clerics has it dashed headlong. They all look to you to give them food in due time, for all the creatures of God live at his bidding. So, in other words, it's almost like the devil. It's leading people astray. It's what enticed Eve. It was once in the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden in paradise, but it was thrown out. So we see this one being is something that for Christians and Jews is primordial and mordial. It's something that's before time. It's something that's after time. It's something that exists in time. It's something that enticed Adam. It's something in Eve. It's something that it still entices us this day. And in the future, it's something that has to, at least for Christians, has to be eradicated, and for Jews, has to be eaten. So I love how we are able to see this metaphor of Leviathan that's taken in two completely different ways by Christians and Jews as being like crazy evil dragon, still good for the Jews. Crazy evil dragon, horrible for the Christians. So that's the first thing. At this meal, I feel will be either the eating of this thing or the eradication of this thing, but it's going to be present at this meal in one way or another. So I feel
So
when we read this, many
yeah.
come from east to west and will eat with Abraham in the kingdom of heaven. They'll eat because the Leviathan has been eradicated, or according to Jewish tradition, they'll eat the Leviathan because it's the Messianic era. So this verse cannot be read without Leviathan, which is so interesting. Okay.
Well, okay, Rabbi, okay, this is fascinating, right? So you're saying that Jewish tradition that you will eat you will eat the Leviathan.
Oh my
Leviathan.
God, Isaac, let me tell you the craziest story about this. Esther's, my wife's grandfather, was a big rabbi, and he was allergic to fish. And when he was a kid, just I want to show you how rampant and ubiquitous the story is. When he was a kid, his father used to force feed him some fish, even though he's allergic. I guess, I don't know what their attitude towards allergic in the early 20th century was. But he said, if you don't eat it now, how are you going to be able to eat the Leviathan in the time to come? It was so much part of Jewish culture that you better eat your fish because you can't be able to eat the Leviathan other time. This
So,
is part and parcel of the culture. Yeah.
so Rabbi, this is fascinating, right? So when you think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this feast, Leviathan, all this, you also don't, it's also implying we'll have the same bodies, as in, will Isaac, the person Isaac, look like this and have, we have
So
like,
Jewish tradition is I can tell you it's really interesting. Jewish tradition has two concrete traditions. One is that of Maimonides. Maimonides says that, listen, bodies, the Greek like bodies, but the Aristotle doesn't. To be physical is to be a sin and to be a waste. So Maimonides holds that the only point of resurrection is to die again, because the worst thing in the world would be on the earth. But according to Ramban Nachmanides, it seems once you're resurrected, you get those cartoons and you kind of live in those forests of fruits and veggies and with the lions and tigers, playing cards with them.
yeah,
And
but Rabbi,
Judaism doesn't have a definitive opinion about what's going to happen in the Messianic era, save there is a Messianic era. And I think when you look at this, it's one of the things that we view eating probably as a metaphor. We view, all these things that when you say eating, you'll eat, like no one thinks on either opinion that the eating will be necessary to make your body nutritious. It'll be eating because this is how humans live it up. It's almost a metaphor like we'll be like a king eating grapes, like that. Okay.
Rabbi, this is fascinating. So, I think I like the Christian perspective. I would eat because
I
the
hate dragons, Isaac says.
the Leviathan has been destroyed. And so, but then okay, so there's the aspect of eating, but he includes people of the East and the West, which I think by definition means non-Jewish Gentiles,
Okay,
right?
so let's go to our next topic, which be what does it mean by East and West? So the thing that I think is very meaningful is two facts. One is that Abraham, when he has more children after Sarah dies,
Yeah.
he doesn't want them to inherit with Isaac, so he sends them to the east. And there's this, I think, idea that people in the East have their roots in Western tradition, or better, in the Abrahamic tradition, but they're different people. So that's one thing I think we take into account. Another thing, though, that I think is more important is that the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud, is also called the Talmud Ma'arava, the West. And a lot of times, the way that Jews saw themselves in that time period, you got to remember, they didn't really, they obviously didn't interact with North or South America. They didn't interact with China. They didn't interact with India. They didn't interact with Australia. They didn't interact with Mongolia, north to Russia. So East was Iraq, Kuwait, Babylon. West was Israel. That was the known world. While Africa was known world, they didn't really interact. Past Egypt, really didn't really know what was happening. In this time period, obviously Rome was a prominent thing, but in Israel, they probably viewed the world. The most important parts of the world was the West was Israel, and the East was Kuwait, Babylon, Iraq, that area. So East to West, and that's just saying the whole known world of people where Jews would have come from. So on the one hand, you could say, I'll tell you, many will come to come from East and West, and will eat with these people. This could mean everyone in the world, the non-Jews. And another way to read it, it'll be like east to west is the known main part of the world at that point, how Jews would view the world. They wouldn't say north to south. No one would say, oh, past Syria is what? They wouldn't go like Syria, Turkey, Russia. They would just say, southern Turkey, that's kind of like the top. And the south would have been literally the sea right there. So I think east to west would have been like the known world. That's how I would view it for the Jews. Okay. Our last concept, Isaac, is we talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what I wanted to do is maybe ask you, why are these three guys here popping up here? They do show up again in Matthew in chapter 20 or so. But over here, it's really surprising, right? Like, why are they there at the end of days all of a sudden? Like, if I was going to ask you, Isaac, who's there at the end of days? You're not
Yeah,
going to say
Rabbi,
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
I would say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because I think Paul grounds Christianity in the covenant God made with Abraham. It all starts with that promise there with Abraham and how Jesus opened this up. So, from a Christian perspective, it makes perfect sense that the covenant started with Abraham. Jesus was made open to
Yeah, I
everybody.
know, but like, it just seems so, like, again, for me, it seems so random. And don't forget, he's saying this to the centurion. Like, this is the centurion probably be like, who are they? When you look at Luke, you get a very different text a little bit. It says there will be. It's really the next verse. The next. It really combines this verse and the next verse, and it really mentions Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob more as. And when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, those are just examples and maybe not the rule. So what I want to do is maybe just compare. I found this really interesting text. I try to think, are there any examples where I think of where we talk about in Judaism, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as just appearing in the world to come? Are they're appearing in messianic times? If anything, you would think, just as you mentioned, they're just like Christianity will have a resurrection, so to Judaism. So you would think, like, what would the Midrashic tales talk about when they say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So I found one, and I think it's a good to show the contrast of this and Christianity. It's a little bit, it's not long, but it's a little, I'm gonna have to read it slowly, but let me read it to you and see what you think about it. Okay. Ravatal.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I have to,
Oh, you want?
yeah, can I
Okay,
have to
okay.
keep
So
it?
we'll do this tomorrow, no problem.
We'll do this
Okay.
tomorrow, Rabbi. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.